Georgia, 1860. Silas Harrow owned 300 acres of cotton and 42 enslaved people. Every morning he ate fresh eggs with crisp bacon. Every evening roasted meat and wine. His table was always overflowing. His stomach was never empty. The slaves ate from a barrel, not a clean barrel, not food meant for humans.
Quick, get it all back
corn,
before it spoils.
decaying meat.
I'm trying,
a thick,
there's
sour
so much.
liquid that smelled
Everyone,
like
help us!
something dead. Silas called it slave rations. He believed feeding those people well was a waste of money. A slave doesn't need good food, he told visitors. A slave needs to work. For 5 long years, that was the rule. The master feasted like a king. The slaves ate garbage. Nobody questioned it. Nobody protested. That was simply how things ran on Harrow Plantation. Until one night, everything changed. A slave dropped some of that rotten food on the cabin floor. It wasn't an act of rebellion. It was exhaustion, weakness, an accident. But Silas didn't see accidents. He only saw disrespect. He grabbed his whip and went alone to the slave cabins. No overseer, no backup, just him and his authority. He intended to teach a lesson about wasting food. He walked into that cabin, confident, commanding, sure of himself. 30 minutes later, someone ran screaming to the big house for help. They found Silas on the floor. His face was pale, his body trembling, his eyes wide, filled with something that looked like pure terror. What had happened in that cabin? And why hadn't anyone intervened? The answer involves a man over 7 feet tall who never forgot a single meal. Before we continue with this story of revenge, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment which city you're listening from. Thank you. Now let's continue. Silas Harrow wasn't born cruel. His father had been cruel. His grandfather had been cruel. Cruelty was the family business, passed down like the land itself. He inherited Harrow Plantation in 1855 when his father died. 300 acres of prime Georgia cotton, a large house with 12 rooms, 42 slaves, everything a man needed to succeed. Silas was 32 years old and determined to prove he could run the plantation better than his father ever did. More profit, less waste, maximum efficiency. The first thing he changed was the food. His father had fed the slaves reasonably, not lavishly but adequately. Cornmeal, salted pork, vegetables from the garden, basic food that kept people working. It cost money, but that was the standard. Silas looked at those costs and saw opportunity. Why am I spending good money feeding people who don't produce enough to justify it? He asked his wife one evening at dinner. She didn't answer. She had learned not to answer his questions about plantation management. Silas began experimenting. He reduced portions first, then reduced quality. He bought the cheapest corn he could find, often moldy or crawling with bugs. He bought meat other plantations had rejected, cuts that were going bad, pieces unsafe to eat. When shipments arrived spoiled, instead of sending them back, Silas had them taken straight to the slave quarters. They can eat it or go hungry, he said. Their choice. The overseer, a man named Cotton who'd worked for Silas's father, objected once. Sir, some of this meat is rotten. It will make people sick. Then they'll have to eat it faster before it rots. Silas replied, and Cotton never objected again. Within 6 months, Silas had cut food costs by 70%. He was proud of this number, wrote it down in his ledger, and mentioned it to other plantation owners at church. Some looked uncomfortable. Others nodded approvingly. One man pulled him aside after service. "Are you feeding your people enough to work?" he asked quietly. "They're working, aren't they?" Silas answered, "For now. But hungry slaves get ideas, dangerous ideas." Silas laughed. "My slaves know their place." The man didn't laugh back. He just stared, his expression a mix of pity and warning. Every master thinks that, until they are proven wrong, but Silas wasn't worried. He had Cotton and 2 other men with guns keeping order. He had dogs trained to track runners. He had the law on his side and God on his conscience. What could 42 starving people do to him? The barrel system began in 1857. Silas had been running the plantation for 2 years, and his profits were excellent, but he wanted more. Always looking to cut costs further, he had an idea. Instead of distributing individual rations, he would prepare one large batch of food daily. All the scraps, spoiled corn, bad meat, and vegetable waste would go into a single barrel. Water would be added to stretch it. The mixture would be stirred into a thick soup and ladled out twice a day. It's more efficient, he explained to Cotton. Less waste, easier distribution, 1 barrel instead of 42 portions. It's also disgusting, Cotton muttered, quietly enough for Silas to pretend he didn't hear. The barrel was enormous, holding 20 gallons. It sat outside the largest slave cabin, and twice a day. People lined up with whatever containers they had, cups, bowls, hollowed gourds. They held out their hands and received their portion of thick grey-brown liquid that smelled of rot and tasted even worse. Children cried when they had to eat it. Adults forced it down because the alternative was starvation. Some fell sick, with stomach pains and fever. One old woman died, though Silas insisted it was old age, not food. The slaves called the barrel Silas's gift. When they said it to his face, it sounded respectful. When they said it to each other, the bitterness was obvious. Yet they ate from it every day, because there was no other choice. Silas watched this system work for 3 years. 3 years of maximum profit and minimum cost. 3 years believing he had found the perfect method. He never noticed that one man was watching him back. Jedediah had arrived at Harrow Plantation in 1857, the same year the barrel system began. Silas bought him at auction in Savannah for less than expected. The auctioneer had seemed almost apologetic. He's strong as an ox, but he don't talk much, makes people nervous. Previous owner said he was trouble, though I'm not sure what kind of trouble exactly. Silas looked at Jedediah on the auction block. The man was massive, over 7 feet tall, shoulders like a bull, arms thick as fence posts. His skin was dark as midnight. His face was expressionless, his eyes seeming to look at everything and nothing at the same time. "He looks perfect to me," Silas said, and bought him immediately. Jedediah was put to work in the cotton fields at once. He worked without complaint, picking more cotton than any 2 men combined. He never talked back, never used trouble, never even looked directly at the white men. He seemed like the perfect slave. But Jedediah was watching, always watching. He watched Silas eat breakfast on the big house porch. Eggs and bacon, fresh bread with butter, coffee with real sugar, fruit preserves made by the cook. He watched the barrel being filled each morning with spoiled corn, rotten meat, and dirty water. He watched the thick sludge being stirred with a wooden paddle. He watched people line up for their portion. He saw children get sick, adults grow thin, the old woman die after 3 days of fever. And he remembered all of it. Jedediah had a perfect memory. He remembered every face, every word, every taste, every smell, every sensation. He remembered the first spoonful of barrel food he ate, the texture like mud, the taste like decay, the stomach cramps, the way he had to force himself not to vomit because vomiting meant wasting food and punishment would follow. He remembered the second spoonful, the third, the 100th, the 1000th. 3 years of eating from that barrel, 2 meals per day, over 2,000 meals of poison disguised as food. Jedediah counted every single one. Other slaves sometimes spoke of running away, fighting back, burning the big house, poisoning the master's food, or other impossible plans. Jedediah never joined in. He listened, worked, ate from the barrel and counted. He waited for the right moment, an opportunity, a moment when the numbers of revenge would balance, when the risk would be worth the reward. He didn't know when it would come, but he knew he would recognize it. In the big house, Silas's wife Martha worried about her husband, not because of how he treated the slaves. She grew up on a plantation, this was normal life. She worried because he was changing in other ways. He used to smile, joke with visitors, enjoy his success. Now he obsessed over numbers, profits, cutting costs. He spent hours in his study, going over ledgers, finding new ways to save pennies. "You were becoming your father," she said one night. "My father died poor," Silas snapped. "I won't make that mistake. Your father died with friends and respect. What will you die with?" Silas didn't answer. He returned to his ledgers. Martha stopped talking to him, focusing on running the house, keeping appearances, pretending everything was fine when visitors came. But she knew something was wrong. She could feel it in the air, in the way the house slaves moved around Silas, careful and quiet, in the way Cotton sometimes looked at her with sympathy. Something bad was coming. She didn't know what or when, but she felt it approaching like a storm on the horizon. In the slave quarters, an old woman named Ruth worked in the big house kitchen. She had been cooking for the Harrow family for 30, She had cooked for Silas's father. She had cooked for Silas when he was just a little boy. She knew every recipe, every taste he liked, every secret addition, and she knew exactly what went into that barrel each and every day. Ruth was 70 years old, too old for working in the fields, too valuable to be sold. She moved slowly now, her hands bent and twisted with age, but she still ran the kitchen. Nothing happened there without her knowing about it. When Silas started the barrel system, Ruth was the one who had to prepare it. Every single morning she gathered the the spoiled food, the waste. She poured it into the barrel, she added water. She stirred it with the paddle until it became the thick, disgusting mixture that fed 42 people. She hated every second of it. But she did it because refusing meant punishment or death, because she was old and weary, because what other choice did she have? Then one day, Jedediah came into the kitchen. At first he didn't speak, just stood in the doorway, so tall his head nearly touched the frame. Ruth looked at him and felt something strange. Not fear exactly, maybe recognition, like staring at a knife and knowing that sooner or later someone would use it. "What do you want?" she asked. Jedediah stepped inside. He looked around the kitchen at the pots and pans, at the fresh food prepared for the master's table, at the barrel sitting quietly in the corner, waiting to be filled. Then he looked at Ruth. Really looked at her. When he finally spoke, his voice was deep, as if it came from beneath the ground. "I want you to save some," he said. Ruth frowned. "Save what?" "The worst of it," he replied. "The most rotten, the most spoiled. Don't throw it away. Keep it. Store it somewhere safe." "Why?" Ruth asked. Jedediah didn't answer with words. He just stared at her with eyes that held 3 years of counting, 3 long years of waiting, 3 years of watching Silas eat fresh food, while everyone else had to eat filth. Ruth understood without needing more explanation. "That's dangerous," she said quietly. "Yes," Jedediah agreed. "Could get us both killed." "Yes," Ruth repeated. She thought about her 70 years, about 30 years cooking for the Harrow family, about every meal she had prepared for that cursed barrel, about the children she had seen fall sick, about the old woman who had died. "How much do you need?" she asked finally. Jedediah smiled, the first time since he had come to the plantation. It wasn't a happy smile, it was something else entirely. "Enough to fill his belly the way he has filled ours," he said. Ruth nodded slowly. "I'll need time." "I've got time," Jedediah said. "I've been counting for 3 years. I can count a little longer." He left the kitchen as quietly as he had come. Ruth stood there for a long moment, staring at the barrel, thinking about the secret she had just agreed to keep. Then she got to work. The next morning, Ruth began her careful task. When she prepared the barrel, she set aside the absolute worst portions, meat that had turned green and slimy, corn so moldy it looked furry, vegetables rotting into black mush. Instead of tossing them into the barrel, she stored them in a sealed clay pot hidden beneath the kitchen floorboards. Every day she added more, a handful here, a scoop there. Never enough to be noticed, never enough to change the usual disgusting mixture. Only the worst pieces, stored in darkness. Slowly, the pot filled. The smell became unbearable. Ruth had to wrap cloth around her face whenever she opened it. The mixture inside was beyond spoiled, toxic, deadly, even in tiny amounts. "This could kill a man," she whispered to herself one morning, staring at the pot. That was exactly the point. Weeks passed, then months. Ruth continued her secret work. Jedediah never asked about it, never reminded her. He simply worked in the fields, ate from the barrel, and waited. Other slaves noticed something different about him. He had always been quiet, but now he seemed focused, purposeful, like a man with a secret plan. When someone complained about the food, he didn't join in. When someone talked about running, he didn't respond. He just worked, watched, and counted. "That big man ain't right," one field worker said. "He looks at Master Silas like he sees something we can't see. Shouldn't leave him be." Another said, "Man, that size got his own thoughts." Even Cotton, the overseer, noticed. He began watching Jedediah closely, looking for trouble. But there were no signs. Jedediah was the perfect worker, obedient, strong, silent. That worried Cotton more than rebellion ever could. "Something about that big one bothers me," Cotton said to Silas one afternoon. "He's the best worker I have," Silas replied, without looking up from his ledger. He picks more cotton than anyone else, never complains, never causes problems. That's what bothers me, Cotton said. Man that big, that strong, and so quiet. It ain't natural. Silas finally looked up. You want me to sell my best worker because he's too good at his job? Cotton didn't answer. He knew it sounded strange, but his instincts screamed danger. He had worked plantations for 20 years. He could read slaves. Most wore their feelings plainly. Fear, anger, resignation. But Jedediah wore nothing. His face was a mask. His eyes revealed nothing. Like staring at a locked door, knowing something dangerous waited behind it. Just keep an eye on him, Cotton said. I do. I keep an eye on all of them, Silas replied, returning to his ledger. Now let me work. These numbers won't balance themselves. Cotton left, but the uneasy feeling stayed. In the big house, Martha Harrow noticed the tension too. The house slaves moved differently now, quieter, more careful. They avoided eye contact even more than usual. One morning she asked Ruth, "Is something wrong in the quarters?" Ruth kept her eyes down, stirring a pot of soup for the master's lunch. "No, ma'am. Everything same as always." "You're lying," Martha said. Ruth's hand paused. She was too old to hide everything, too old to pretend she didn't understand what Martha meant. "Things been the same too long," Ruth said quietly. "Sometimes, when they stay the same too long, they got to change. That's just nature, ma'am." Martha stared at the old woman's back. "What kind of change?" "Can't say, ma'am. Don't know myself. Just feel it coming like rain." Martha wanted to ask more, but heard her husband's footsteps. She left quickly, not wanting Silas to catch her questioning the slaves. But Ruth's words stayed with her. Things been the same too long. They got to change. She found herself looking out windows more often, watching the quarters, the fields, her husband walking the property with his usual confidence, and wondering if that confidence was about to cost him everything. The pot beneath the floor was nearly full. 3 months of collecting the worst food imaginable. Ruth had added more than scraps now. Spoiled lard, rancid cooking grease, pieces of meat that had liquefied. The smell was horrific, even sealed, even buried. The odor seeped through. Ruth burned extra wood in the kitchen to mask it. She told the other house slaves the smell came from a dead rat in the walls. They believed her, because they wanted to. Asking Questi, Ons could get them killed. One evening, Jedediah came to the kitchen again. Ruth was alone, preparing the master's dinner. She looked up when his shadow filled the doorway. "It's ready," she said simply. Jedediah nodded. "How much?" "Near 5 pounds of the worst poison God ever let rot. Enough to kill a horse. Good." "When?" Ruth asked. "Soon," he said, waiting for the right moment. "When he's alone. When he comes to us instead of us going to him." "He never comes to the quarters," she said. "He will," Jedediah said. "Men like him always do eventually. They get angry over something small. They want to prove their power. They come looking for someone to punish." Ruth thought about 5 years of Silas Harrow's cruelty. About the barrel, the sick children, the old woman who died. "What happens after?" she asked. "After I do this, they'll know it was one of us. They'll punish everyone." "Maybe," Jedediah said. "Or maybe they'll think he ate bad food from his own table. Maybe his heart just stopped. Maybe they'll never know for sure." "And if they do?" Ruth asked. "I'll make sure they know it was me. Not you, not anyone else, just me. They'll probably hang me. But I'll die knowing he ate every spoonful of what he fed us. I'll die knowing he felt what we felt." "That's worth something." Ruth wiped her hands on her apron. She thought about being 70, about how many years she might still have, about whether dying for this was worth it. "I got grandchildren in the quarters," she said. 3 of them. They eat from that barrel every day. They deserve better than what he gives them." "Yes," Jedediah said. "Then do it right. Make sure it counts." He smiled that same frightening smile and left. Ruth stood alone, staring at the floor where the pot was hidden. She had crossed a line. No going back now. Whatever happened next, she was part of it. She went back to preparing the master's dinner. Roasted chicken with herbs, fresh vegetables, soft bread, wine from France. As she worked, she thought about justice, about revenge, and whether feeding a cruel man his own cruelty was justice or simply vengeance. Maybe there was no difference. The moment Jedediah had been waiting for came 3 weeks later. A young slave named Thomas was carrying a bucket of the barrel food to share with his family. He was thin, weak from months of poor nutrition. His hands shook as he walked. The bucket was heavy. He stumbled on a stone. The bucket tipped. About a quart of the thick, disgusting liquid spilled onto the ground outside the cabin. Thomas stared at the puddle, horrified. That was food, wasted food. Even if it was garbage, even if it made people sick, throwing it away was not allowed. Someone noticed. Someone reported it to Cotton. Cotton went straight to Silas. Silas was sitting in his study, bent over his ledgers, counting numbers and losses. When Cotton told him about the spilled food, something inside Silas broke. All the pressure about money, about profit, about control, boiled into raw anger. "Wasted food," he yelled. "That food costs money. Do they think I run a charity here? It was an accident, sir. The boy is weak from, I don't care if it was an accident. He must learn. They all must learn." Silas stood up and grabbed the whip hanging on the wall. "I'll teach them myself. Sir, maybe I should handle this." "No, I will do it. I want them to see me. I want them to remember who is in charge." Cotton tried to argue, but Silas was already heading for the door. He had seen this side of Silas before. When Silas reached this point, words meant nothing. Silas walked across the land toward the slave cabins. Evening had come. The sun was sinking low. Most of the workers were already back inside. They saw him coming, saw the whip, and quickly disappeared indoors. Cotton followed behind, uneasy. Something felt wrong. The cabins were too quiet. Usually there were cries, begging, fear in the air. Tonight there was only silence. Silas stopped at the largest cabin, where Thomas lived with his family. He did not knock. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark, lit by a single candle. Several people were inside. Thomas, his mother, two other families crowded into the space, and in the back, almost hidden by shadow, stood Jedediah. Silas pointed at Thomas. "You spilled the food." Thomas nodded, shaking. "Do you know how much that food cost me? Do you understand how much money you dumped on the ground?" "I'm sorry, Master Silas. I didn't mean does not matter. You need to learn the value of things." Silas lifted his whip. "Everyone needs to learn." He pulled his arm back to strike. Thomas shut his eyes and waited. The whip never came down. Instead, a deep voice spoke from the darkness. One word. "No." Silas turned and saw Jedediah step forward into the candlelight. He saw the massive man, taller than 7 feet. He saw hands that could crush bone. For the first time in 5 years, Silas felt fear on his own land. "Get back," Silas ordered, but his voice trembled. Jedediah did not move back. He stepped closer. Others int. His cabin shifted away, clearing space. The room felt smaller. The ceiling seemed lower. Jedediah's head nearly touched the beams. "I said get back." Silas raised the whip toward Jedediah. Jedediah moved faster than expected. His hand shot out and caught Silas's wrist in midair. The whip stopped cold. Silas pulled, but the arm did not move. It was like pulling against iron. "Let go of me," Silas shouted. "Let go now or I'll—" Another hand closed around his shoulder. Not enough to break it, but enough to promise that it could. Outside, Cotton heard noise and rushed toward the cabin. Other slaves stepped out and blocked his way. They said nothing. They did nothing. They simply stood there. Cotton reached for his gun, then stopped. There were too many. He waited, frozen, listening. Inside, Jedediah pushed Silas down. Not rough, almost calm, but unstoppable. Silas landed on the dirt floor. His fine clothes were stained. His power drained away like fog at sunrise. "What are you doing, Silas?" asked, his voice high with panic. "Do you know what they'll do to you for this?" Jedediah did not answer. He held Silas in place with one hand. Then a small girl walked in. Her name was Naomi. She was 10 years old, thin as sticks, bones visible under her skin. She carried a heavy wooden bowl, struggling with its weight. The smell reached Silas at once. His face twisted. "What is that?" Naomi placed the bowl in front of him. It was filled with thick, gray-brown sludge. Grease floated on top. Rotten chunks drifted inside. The smell was unbearable. Decay, rot, something worse. Silas knew it. Barrel food, but even worse than usual. "You can't be serious," Silas said, looking at Jedediah. "You can't think, Jed." Odiah grabbed Silas's jaw and forced his face toward the bowl. Ruth stepped forward, moving slow with age. Her eyes held 30 years of cooking for the Harrow family, 30 years of watching them eat fresh meals while others ate filth. £5, she said softly. The same amount you make 42 people share each day. Tonight it's just for you, Master Silas. All of it. Silas struggled. You can't make me eat this. I'm a white man. You're slaves. You'll hang for this. Maybe, Jedediah said. But you'll eat first. He lifted the wooden spoon and filled it with the rotten mix. Eat. Silas clenched his mouth shut. The smell alone made him gag. Jedediah waited. You have a choice. Eat it yourself, or I make you eat it. Either way, you will finish the bowl. This is murder, Silas gasped. No, Ruth said. This is food. The same food you fed us for 5 years. Silas looked around. No one helped him. Outside, Cotton shouted, but calm voices answered him. No one was coming in. Please, Silas begged. I'll change the food. I'll buy better supplies. 5 years too late, Jedediah said. Open. Silas refused. Jedediah pinched his nose shut. Silas fought, but air vanished. His lungs burned. His vision darkened. He opened his mouth to breathe, and the spoon went in. The taste was unbearable. Rotten, slimy, gritty. His body rejected it. He gagged. Jedediah covered his mouth. Swallow. Silas swallowed. That was 1 spoon, Jedediah said. 40 more, Silas cried as it continued, spoon after spoon. His strength faded. His power was gone. He understood now. He was helpless. The bowl slowly emptied. Silas whispered, I'm going to die. Maybe, Jedediah said quietly, but tonight you will know what hunger tastes like. Finish eating first. Outside, Cotton was still pressing to get in. More white men had arrived now. The house servants had rushed to alert them. There were 5 armed men outside the cabin demanding entry, but 30 slaves were blocking the door. They carried no weapons, made no threats, simply stood there in silence. A living barrier. Step aside or we'll shoot, one of the white men yelled. Then shoot, someone answered evenly. You only have 5 guns and there's 42 of us. From inside the cabin, screaming echoed. If Master Silas is hurt, maybe you should ask how it happened. Maybe you should wonder if he finally went too far. The white men paused. They could fire, could kill several slaves, but then what? A full-scale rebellion? A massacre? Word would spread to other plantations of white men murdering dozens of slaves. The numbers were not in their favor, so they waited, guns raised, eyes fixed on the door, ears straining to hear what was happening inside. Inside, Silas was on spoonful 32. The bowl was nearly 3/4 empty. His face was pale, slick with sweat. His hands trembled. His breathing was shallow and fast. The spoiled food was winning against his body. He could feel it, the poison creeping through his system, his organs struggling to process something they were never meant to handle. I can't eat anymore, he gasped. I physically can't. Jedediah looked at the bowl, looked at Silas, then set the spoon down and lifted the entire bowl. Then drink it, he said. He tilted the bowl to Silas's lips. The thick, chunky liquid poured into his mouth. Silas had no choice, swallow or choke. He swallowed, gulp after gulp of the most toxic, rotten, foul mixture ever called food. It filled his mouth, coated his throat, slid into his stomach in an endless stream of poison. The bowl emptied. 5 pounds of concentrated rot, all inside Silas Harrow now. Jedediah set the empty bowl down and released his hold on Silas's shoulder. Silas slumped forward, tried to stand. His legs failed. He collapsed back onto the dirt floor. What did you do to me? He whispered. Fed you, Jedediah said plainly. Same way you fed us. Nothing more, nothing less. Silas's stomach convulsed. The poison fought back. His body, realizing it was dying, tried desperately to defend itself, but there was too much decay, too many toxins at once. He tried to vomit. Nothing came. His body locked down, trying to contain the damage. His vision blurred. The cabin spun. Faces emerged from the shadows. Some sad, some angry, some simply watching, like rain falling silently. I'll have every one of you killed for this, Silas gasped. Maybe, Ruth said, but you won't be there to see it. Silas tried to speak, to threaten, to command, but his throat closed. His chest tightened, his heart raced, then slowed, beating unevenly, like a drum with a cracked skin. He reached for his neck. His face turned gray, his lips pale. His eyes widened as death approached. Help, he whispered. Help me. No one moved. They just watched. The master of Harrow Plantation dying the same way the old woman had 3 years before after eating his food, struggling like children had when the barrel made them sick, suffering like he had made everyone else suffer. Silas's hand dropped. His body convulsed once, twice, then lay still. The cabin was quiet except for the sound of breathing. 42 breaths, 1 man gone. Jedediah looked at the body, felt nothing. No joy, no guilt, just completion. The debt was paid, the count was settled. Ruth knelt and checked for a pulse. None. She stood, calm. "He's dead," she said. Outside, Cotton heard her words, heard the finality. "Break it down," he shouted to the others. "Break the door." They rushed forward. The slaves at the door didn't resist, just stepped aside. There was no reason to fight now. The white men entered the cabin, saw Silas on the dirt floor, grey-faced, eyes open, empty and unseeing. The empty bowl lay beside him, the stench of what he'd been fed filling the air. Cotton knelt, checked for breath, found none. He looked up at the calm slaves surrounding him. "What happened here?" he demanded. "Master Silas came to punish Thomas for spilling food," Ruth said, steady. "He got angry, shouted about how we didn't appreciate what we were given, said he'd show us real hunger. Then he saw the barrel food, said if we thought it was so bad he'd prove it himself, said he'd eat it to show we were ungrateful." Cotton stared. "You expect me to believe he ate 5 pounds of rotten food willingly?" "I saw it myself," Ruth said. "He was furious, determined to prove a point, ate the whole bowl. Then his face changed. He fell. We tried to help. There was nothing we could do." Cotton looked at Jedediah, expressionless in the corner, at the other slaves silently confirming the story. "He was murdered," Cotton said flatly. "By his own food," Ruth agreed. "Food he chose to serve, food he chose to eat. Terrible, but whose fault is it?" Another white man looked at the remains of the thick, spoiled mess, disgust twisting his face. "Nobody could eat that much of this willingly," he said. "Master Silas was stubborn," Ruth said. "Stubborn men do stubborn things." Cotton stood, fury building. He wanted to shoot, hang, demand justice. But the numbers didn't favor him. If he killed Ruth, the others would testify. If he killed them all, there'd be a massacre and questions he couldn't answer. If he singled out Jedediah, the rest would revolt. And deep down, he wondered, maybe Silas got exactly what he deserved. "Get out," he said to the slaves. "All of you, leave the cabin." They filed out. Jedediah was last. Passing Cotton, the overseer looked up at the towering man over 7 feet tall. "I know what really happened," Cotton said quietly. "I know you killed him." "Master Silas ate bad food and died," Jedediah replied. "Same as the old woman 3 years ago. Same as almost happened to many. Terrible thing, bad food." He left, ducking through the doorway. Cotton stood alone with Silas's body, staring at the empty bowl, at the legacy of cruelty finally coming full circle. He stepped outside. The white men were gathered. The slaves had returned to their cabins. Quiet again. "What do we do now?" one asked. Cotton considered the truth, the lie, the story that would cause the least trouble. Silas Harrow died for eating spoiled food, he said finally. Tragic accident. His fault for not checking what he served. Will improve food quality immediately to prevent this happening again. The men stared. "You're just accepting their story," one said. "Got a better one?" Cotton's voice was firm. "You want to explain to the authorities how 42 slaves overpowered their master on his own plantation and we did nothing? You want that story spread across Georgia?" Silence. "That's the truth. Silas Harrow died from bad food. Anyone says otherwise is lying." They carried the body back to the big house. Martha Harrow screamed, collapsed in grief. House slaves helped her to bed, brought sedatives. The next morning, a doctor came from town, examined the body, smelled the contents of the stomach, turned green. "What in God's name did this man eat?" the doctor asked. "Spoiled food," Cotton said. He tested the rations himself. Worse than expected. The doctor wrote down death by food poisoning. No one wanted to dig deeper. Silas Harrow was buried 3 days later. Small funeral, few attendees. His wife sold the plantation and moved to Charleston within a month. Cotton ran the plantation for the new owner. First, he destroyed the barrel. Second, he provided proper food. Cornmeal, salt pork, vegetables. Not fancy, but safe. The change wasn't forgotten. The slaves ate better after that. Some eventually ran away, some were sold, some stayed until the war. But they all remembered that night. Remembered Silas Harrow on the dirt floor, force-fed 5 pounds of his own cruelty, dying from the same poison he had given for years. They told the story to their children, every detail preserved, the barrel, the smell, the empty bowl. The master who thought he was untouchable learned that everyone could be touched. Jedediah remained on the plantation for 2 more years, then one night simply walked away, vanished into the darkness, never seen again. Some said he went north, some said he vanished into the swamps, some said he died alone in the woods, but Ruth, who lived another 5 years, had her own idea. "A man like that doesn't die easy," she said. "He's still out there somewhere. And every master who thinks it's okay to feed trash to hungry people, every white man who believes slaves don't feel pain or remember injustices, they should think about Jedediah. Should think about what happens when you push someone too far, when you take too much, when you forget that everyone, no matter how powerless they seem, can find a way to strike back." She gave her old knowing smile. They should think about that, and they should be scared. In the kitchen of the big house, the new cook never discovered the clay pot hidden under the floorboards, never knew about the 3 months of collecting the deadliest poison she could imagine, never realized how close she had come to finding it while cleaning. Ruth had removed it the day after Silas died, buried it deep in the woods where no one would ever stumble upon it, washed her hands clean, went back to cooking. But sometimes, when she prepared meals for the new master, she remembered that night, remembered justice served in a wooden bowl, remembered a cruel man choking on his own cruelty, and she allowed herself to feel something she rarely felt in 70 years of slavery. Satisfaction. The story of Silas Harrow became legend in that part of Georgia. Other plantation owners heard whispers about it, heard that a master had died mysteriously after mistreating his slaves, heard that the slaves were somehow involved but were never punished. Some masters got the message, improved conditions a little, treated people slightly better, not out of kindness but out of fear, out of the understanding that absolute power isn't really absolute, that there are limits to what even the most patient slave will endure. Others ignored the story, called it exaggeration, kept up their cruelty, and sometimes on those plantations, other strange accidents occurred. Other masters died unexpectedly. Other scores were settled in ways that left no evidence but plenty of justice. Because once the story was out there, once people realized that revenge was possible, that the powerless could find ways to strike the powerful, everything changed a little. Not enough to end slavery, not enough to bring freedom, but enough to remind every cruel master that someone was always watching, always counting, always remembering. And someday, somehow, that debt would be fully paid, with interest. The Harrow plantation house still stands today, though barely. The roof has fallen in. The walls are crumbling. The land has returned to forest, but locals avoid it. Say it's haunted. Say you can sometimes smell rotten food in the wind. Say if you stand near where the slave quarters once were, you can hear the sound of someone eating, spoons scraping against wood, swallowing, choking, the sound of a master eating his final meal, the sound of justice finally being served.